Barbara Bush was a rare lady, a blend of strength, grace, wisdom. Her iconic white hair and pearls, a sharp wit, and warmth that enveloped people from all walks of life. Everybody's grandmother. It was an image Barbara Pierce Bush was not only well aware of, but fond of. Though she would one day find herself in the White House as First Lady, she had her own roots in the presidency, fourth cousin, 4 times removed, of the 14th President of the United States, Franklin Pierce. Born in 1925, she grew up in the New York City suburb of Rye. Her father, Marvin Pierce, president of the publishing company McCall. Her mother, Pauline, described in a magazine article as beautiful, fabulous, critical, and meddling. Barbara was a happy child. She attended boarding school at Ashley Hall in South Carolina. Then came the love of her life. Theirs is truly a marriage for the ages. The union between Barbara and George Herbert Walker Bush is the longest presidential marriage in American history. The two met during a Christmas dance at the prestigious Massachusetts boarding school Phillips Academy, where George was a senior. Barbara was 16. He, the son of Connecticut Senator Prescott Bush and Dorothy Walker Bush, they became engaged a year and a half later, just before he took off to fight in the Pacific. Joining the Navy at age 18, George would become the youngest naval aviator of his day. One of the fighter planes he flew, he named for Barbara. In 1944, Bush was piloting a plane that was hit by Japanese anti-aircraft fire. With his plane on fire, he completed his bombing run, the sole survivor of his 3-man crew, rescued by a U.S. submarine. The torpedo bomber pilot would return to his sweetheart, a veteran of 58 combat missions and the Distinguished Flying Cross. The first man she ever kissed, Barbara married George in the midst of World War II, January 6, 1945, tying the knot in Rye. As her husband recuperated, George was 20 years old, Barbara just 19, having dropped out of her studies at Smith College 2 weeks before their wedding day. A family quickly followed, including firstborn George W., and like so many GIs, the new father went to college at Yale, a Bush family tradition. After his graduation and with a growing family, the couple set their eyes on Texas. George needed a job. His father's business connections drew him to the oil business and dresser industries. He started as a sales clerk, moved the family to Midland, later founding Zapata Petroleum. But in 1953, a doctor would deliver a diagnosis no parent wants to hear for a child: cancer. The Bush's 3-year-old daughter, Robin, had become listless, no longer wanted to play. They took her cross-country to a New York hospital willing to treat children, but it didn't work. Combing her hair and holding Robin's little hand, Barbara said she watched her daughter's spirit go. Pauline Robin Bush died 2 months before her 4th birthday. George and Barbara have said they imagine Robin will be the first person they'll see on the other side. The parents, not even 30 years old, faced bewildering grief while raising George W. and baby Jeb. Barbara would eventually give birth to 3 others, Neil, Marvin, and Dorothy. In 1958, the family moved to Houston, where Mr. Bush put aside the oil business, started cultivating his other ambition, politics.
So I am working with some of the leaders in our party and some on the other
It started
side.
off small as chair of the Harris County Republican Party. However, he aimed high, running for U.S. Senate, winning the primary, but facing a Texas institution. Democrat Ralph Yarborough. Bush lost. In 1966, he was elected to Congress from the 7th District, the first Republican to represent Houston. As repayment for a second losing bid for Senate, President Richard Nixon later appointed him UN ambassador. During Watergate, George was Republican National Committee chair, and eventually he'd have to call on Nixon to resign.
At some point to say enough is enough.
On the campaign trail, Barbara was an asset to her husband, friendly, forthright, She won high marks from voters and the press.
I'm so dumb, I've liked all the places we've lived.
At home, she was the family linchpin, the disciplinarian carpool mom. George continued his career in public service as head of the U.S. Liaison Office in Communist China.
Mrs. Bush has done a lot of traveling with her husband, but this was by far the longest trip, and it meant leaving the family behind. It was a relaxed Barbara Bush who talked with DeMiter.
I do a great deal of sightseeing with visitors from the United States. And as George told you, we've had lots of good Texans here. And I do Tai Chi Chuan 2 mornings a week from 7:30 to 8:30. That's Chinese shadow boxing. And it's very difficult. George laughs and says, it looks so easy, but it's all in slow motion and it's exact and it's... I don't think it does me any good, but it makes me feel part of the community a little bit.
3 years later, he was called on to serve as director of the CIA. In 1980, he took on Ronald Reagan for the party's presidential nomination and lost, only to become Reagan's vice president. 8 years later, he won his bid for 41st President of the United States.
There's a close relationship between problems with literacy and learning disabilities.
As second lady, Barbara made literacy her special cause at a time when statistics showed 35 million American adults couldn't read above an 8th grade level.
All too often, Houston high school dropouts get their PhDs and master's degrees in street life, but they have little else to show for it after they drop out. Now comes a joint effort of private enterprise, a non-profit group, and the Houston School District to fight Houston's dropout problem. Barbara Bush, wife of our vice president, hailed the new concept.
It spots and keeps potential dropouts in school, and you can bet they're going to graduate and they're not going to be functionally illiterate. So congratulations are due to all of you who have worked so very hard to see this wonderful academy start.
This will be known as the day the First Lady came
As First Lady, she furthered that work, calling a more literate America the most important issue we have.
Literate human beings make all the difference in the world.
In 1989, the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy was launched, advocating for the most basic of educational skills for both children and parents, the ability to read and write. Barbara stood beside the 41st president during a time of great change. The Berlin Wall torn down, dictators tumbled. In 1990, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, Mr. Bush ordered Operation Desert Storm. It was the first war to be carried on live TV, then a recession.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
And those words would haunt 41 as a broken promise. Rising unemployment seized by the Democratic candidate Bill Clinton.
He said my economic plan reminded him of Elvis economics. The difference in Elvis economics and Bush economics plan is that Elvis has been cited in a number of places lately.
Months after being nominated at the Republican National Convention in Houston, George H.W. and Barbara left the White House after his one term in office. On the horizon, though, 2 sons, one governor of Texas, the other of Florida, both with higher ambitions.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly...
It would be their oldest, George W., who 8 years later became the 43rd president. Since then, Barbara has remained visible, a Mayo Clinic board member, a supporter of the Leukemia Society, the Ronald McDonald House, and the Boys and Girls Club of America, all while working with her son Neil to continue the work of her foundation, raising over $50 million for family literacy programs.
There's always something you can do, whether it's mentoring a child or being a big brother or a big sister.
As for the Bushes' 73-year marriage, it's been well chronicled in the public eye. The couple making visits to the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library at Texas A&M and splitting time between a summer home in Kennebunkport, Maine, and Houston, where they've been spotted at Astros games, cheering on runners in the Houston Marathon, even caught on the Kiss Cam at a Texans game at NRG Stadium. During Barbara's 2009 emergency heart surgery, her husband emotionally reflected on what was most important in life.
We heard from 4 presidents of the United States: Obama, Clinton, Jimmy Carter, and George W. Bush, and me, 5. And I think there's a lot of interest because of who she is.
A woman who was a first lady, the mother of another president, for whom family has always come first. Barbara Bush saw history and is now part of it. Deborah Wrigley, 13 Eyewitness News.